Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wilder Ride podcast, a podcast that took a turn in Season 3, and now that we're in Season 4, we've loved adding the addition of our Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge, a sidecast to our main podcast. Yes, we still like doing movies 1 minute at a time, and we're going to get back to some movies later this year, but we also love getting to know a little bit more about our guests, one moment of their lives to the next. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Alan Sanders.
I am your other one of your hosts, Walt Murray.
And Walt, been a fun week. You were actually back in the radio studios with me this past weekend, getting a crash course on running the board because you're going to be in there for me this coming Saturday.
Yes. In your wisdom, you decided that the best way to ensure you have job security is to have me fill in on your Saturday show. So it should be entertaining, if nothing else.
Well, you know, you've done it before, and I have full faith and confidence in your ability to bring content. Your ability to run the board is not so much there, but the content is all I care about.
Well, at least, if nothing else, I'm going to have 3 hours of stuff going out over the air. Whether it's the right stuff going out over the air is a question, but at least things will be going out over the air.
Well, I know this has been a really busy week for both of us. It feels like I haven't even had a chance besides Saturday to talk to you much. You have just been covered up.
Yeah, this has been crazy. And then I foolishly went on Friday and followed my doctor's advice and got a shingle shot. Not reading what it said in all the paperwork, that the younger you are when you get it, the more your side effects will be evident. So when I left the radio station on Saturday, I went home. I don't even think I ate lunch, and I collapsed and slept until 6 a.m. Sunday morning.
Oh,
so I'm still kind of shaking off the residuals. I came home after work today and took a 30-minute nap, which I never do, and then got ready for this. So, yeah, and on top of all the other stuff I've got going on, I now basically gave myself a self-induced flu for a few days.
Well, you know, because you were bored with 2020? You want to try something different for 2021?
Yeah, sure. I mean, why not? Why not? Just go throw some extra illness on top of everything else.
Well, we've had, in the meantime, my father-in-law finally being able to come visit. So we've been having him here since last week. We had a delayed Mother's Day weekend because she was traveling to go get him and drive down with him last weekend. So I feel like I was in ramp up, finish the movie room, finish all the home projects, get the honey-do list, and then on top of that, get everything washed, clean, pressed, folded, ready to go, like I was running a B&B or something. And I'm not even getting paid.
Yeah. You and I both just seem to find ways to never have a spare moment.
Yeah, and we don't get paid for it.
No,
what are we doing wrong?
That is the great part. So, yeah, our kids got older, and we thought, well, all that time of running kids around and having to spend every single second dealing with them, let's just fill it with other extraneous stuff that doesn't move our bank account forward.
Well, but we're having fun, right?
We are having fun.
Something to be said about that. I will tell you, when we get to the What Are We Watching segment, I have once again, just for some reason, gone all in with things that are on streaming services. So I've got plenty to talk about. I won't have anything that I've read because I've been spending every one of my spare moments either mowing the lawn, finishing the flooring, and entertaining my father-in-law, planning the Mother's Day a week late, or, doing podcast editing.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, I made the mistake Sunday, of course, on top of taking that shot, of helping someone move. And I was talking to Tim Andrews today, who was our guest a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned that, and he said, when you're over 40, you either pay somebody to move or you leave all your stuff as is for the next person.
You just say, you know what? I want to start over anyway.
Yeah.
It's just easier, better for me and my health to just buy everything from scratch.
Yeah. I mean, and if you can't afford it, it's probably, if you can't afford movers, it's probably not worth taking. So you just leave it and go. And I think that would have been wise advice.
That is so funny because, in all honesty, I haven't even wanted to move my daughters back from college. I mean, every year they would move from one dorm or one apartment, and I was just like so tired of being Mr. U-Haul two times a year, fall to start, and then summer to bring them back.
Well, I made the fatal mistake last year of buying a pickup truck. And
you're Mr. Mover already.
That's right. So immediately everybody's like, "Oh, Walt has an old beat up pickup truck. He won't mind, moving my furniture from one end of Atlanta 45 miles to the other end of Atlanta. Oh, and by the way, loading it himself."
Yeah. With all the help that I had rounded up at the last second going, yeah, we're not making it. I cannot tell you the number of times I had my daughter who had friends, quote unquote, college age, strapping young boys that were supposedly, all in it for free pizza and beer at the last second go, yeah, I got a better offer than to move someone else's crap for a Saturday.
Yeah, that makes it a lot of fun. And to their credit, the folks they had lined up did a great job. And some of the real heavy stuff I didn't end up having to move. But still, just getting out there at my age and fitness level and, and doing all that was a little much. But hey, we got them moved. It was good. They're happy. I'm happy. I can check it off as good exercise and keep on rolling.
Well, you know what? It beats the alternative. I know one of the things that does cause people to maybe slip one foot into the grave sooner than normal is retirement, and then they have nothing to do. So I don't ever want to be caught on the other end of that spectrum where I'm just sitting around going, well, I got nothing else to do. Might as well just lay down and sit here. Hope I don't kick over.
Gosh, I think you and I have talked about this before, that we both worked at IBM, and I remember several guys retiring from IBM, and within a year they're gone because they just had nothing else to do.
Right.
So I don't think that's going to be an issue with me. I think buying that pickup truck ensured the fact that I will feel useful for many years to come.
Let's remind our listeners, pickup truck, boat, fishing, and the adventures you tend to go on. Yeah, I don't know how long you'll last, but I guarantee it's going to be a fun story when you check out.
Well, and that's really my goal is have a fun story on the way out.
Oh, I do have one thing. It's not going to be a news thing, but I don't know if you caught it because, for us here in the Southeast, at the time of our recording, we are just getting our Colonial Pipeline kind of back to normal. But did you catch the karma story of the guy with the Hummer that I think it was in North Florida, tried to buy like 12 or 15 big 10-gallon gasoline cans to just hoard all this gas, and must have either sloshed it around or spilled some. And as he was pulling away, some of the gas hit an electrical outlet within the Hummer and sparked a fire and burned up his entire car with all the gas he had just hoarded.
I always hate personal tragedy. Well, let me rephrase that.
Yes.
I often hate personal tragedy. That one, I'm not so upset about.
Remember the story when we talked about the hunter the poacher that got trampled by the elephants because they weren't supposed to be poaching and they got what they deserved?
Exactly.
I feel the same way here. You got what you deserve.
Yeah, that is definitely karma working the right way. And did you see the lady? There was a meme going around. She's in a mask, of course, because everybody's wearing a mask and gloves. And she is pumping gas into garbage bags.
Into those big white clear basket bags. Yes, I saw that. That is just... Are you just wanting a fireball? I mean, I just can't even wrap my mind around the lack of sensibilities people just seem to be lacking.
Yeah, I mean, gas cans are made out of a certain type of plastic for a reason. Garbage bags are not going to hold your unleaded fuel that will burn your car to the
By the
ground.
way, what are you planning to fill up with a garbage bag? Are you going to try to pour that into your tank, into your lawnmower? I mean, you're going to end up spilling like 30 gallons of gas on your driveway for the half gallon that fits in your mower.
Yeah, I'm
you
not
poke
really
a hole in the bottom and go, oh, I didn't think this through. It's full now. What do I do?
I think
Stick my finger in it?
Yes, I think I didn't think this through is really the crux of that one.
So, well, before we bring in our guest, and honestly, I may let you kind of do a little level set before we actually invite him. Anything else you've got for the week?
There's always tons of stuff, but no, I think we're about due to bring Chris in and let him tell us his story.
All right. Well, before we bring him to the stage, I want you to tell me just a moment, where did this relationship come from? How are we getting our guest on our stage tonight? What did you do, Walt?
What did I do indeed? Well, Chris and I are both members of a podcast host group. And in that group, there's a lot of sharing back and forth of information on getting guests and what kind of podcast do you have and how do you deal with these problems or promote your podcast. And Chris had made a comment and he and I kind of bounced off of each other. And I had checked out his profile and I thought, wow, this is a really interesting guy with a fascinating background. And I really wanted to hear his whole story. So I reached out to him and he was gracious enough to get right back to me. And we had a great conversation offline there. And he agreed to come on. And in some ways, I don't really want to steal his thunder because he's done a lot of stuff that will be very interesting to our audience. But a lot of what he's done is in the musical area of entertainment. And that was really what got my attention. But he's also done a ton of other really cool stuff. So I thought, great opportunity to bring Chris in and just let him tell his story and let us feast on it.
Then let's get to it, audience. Put your hands together. Let's welcome to our listeners' lounge, Chris Lott. Chris, welcome.
Yay!
How you doing, man?
Thank you. I'm doing good, man. Thank you for the very gracious introduction, Walt. I really appreciate that.
Well,
oh yeah, well, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on. I really do appreciate you being willing to join us and take the time out of your obviously busy schedule to spend some time hanging out with us.
Of course, man. I mean, as soon as you asked me to come on, and I kind of researched a little bit about the podcast. I'm like, this is going to be fun. This is going to be real fun. Let's do this. Yeah.
Well, let's go from the very, very beginning. We always start off with a very easy early question. As a music-oriented individual, somebody who's gotten into film scoring, film composition, when did it all start? Tell us, what's the beginning step in your memory that said, this could be my career path?
Well, I'm probably going to have to go back and really, back when I was, probably 10, maybe, 9 or 10 years old, I would listen to like various different, things on tape, on cassette tapes, not CDs, cassette tapes. Also records. I would listen to a lot of records as well. And one of them that really stood out was the AC/DC album, Who Made Who. It was for the film Maximum Overdrive. And there was a couple of tracks on there. I don't know if you guys remember, there's no vocals. It's just all instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm listening to those, I would kind of listen to those and look out the car window and just start envisioning different scenarios in my head, different scenes for a movie in my head, maybe movies that I'm coming up with, just different things every time. And I started asking like my family, like, hey, can we get some more, where can I get more music with no vocal, just the instruments? I didn't know what the term was. I didn't know it was called soundtracks or film scores. I had no idea at that time. And then when I discovered it, it was for the film Hard Rain. It was by the composer of Christopher Young, who did Hellraiser 2, Entrapment, Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage. Fantastic composer. And I remember at Walmart, they had a spot where you could pop the CD in there, scan the barcode, and listen to a couple of tracks. And when I heard it, I was like, this is what I want to listen to. This is the type of stuff. And I would sit there and listen to it. And I'm going, this is what I want to do. I want to create this world that's in my head using my own music. How do I do this? And it just kind of went from there to where computers became so advanced to where you could create real orchestral sounds with just a computer.
Mm-hmm.
When I came on, it was right there at the forefront of this. They really started to go into the whole realm of do everything just from a computer. And I just kind of went from there. And then, years later, here I am talking to you guys about, doing this.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you were going through that, did you also become a fan of those movies, or was it just the music that really captured your imagination?
I was always a fan of movies, growing up, and I was always a big fan of film scores, like I said, even before I knew that they were called film scores. But I was always a big fan of films. I always wanted to say I wanted to become a director. I didn't really know that music would be film composer would be the term I really wanted to do, but I always want to be a director. So I was always into films. But when film scores started to really capture, my attention, it it kind of took over to the point of I would start buying scores and soundtracks to films I haven't even seen yet. I still do it. I to this day, since I have Spotify, I'll go listen to the soundtrack before I even watch the film, and I'm like, oh, I really like the score to this, and then I'll watch the film and I'm going, that didn't really work, or a lot of times it will work.
Yeah, it is interesting in those times when you find that the soundtrack is far better than the movie itself.
Oh, yeah. Case in point, we covered Hard Rain on our podcast, and that film has not aged well. The soundtrack is still great, but the film not so much.
Well, as you were sort of getting into this idea of creating scores, creating the background sounds, the music that was going to be helping orchestrally tell or enhance the story being told on the screen, did you ever think you'd be going to film school? Where did you think you would go to school? When did you just start realizing you needed to have a little more maybe training to be able to put some of this together compositionally?
Oh man, I have to say it was like later on. It wasn't. I mean, I had scored a lot of short films at this point. I was really knee deep in it at this, and I was going, maybe I need to do something about this. And unfortunately, the way life just happened, it was for me going to school for this wasn't really an option. And so I basically just had to teach myself how to do everything and learn as far as like, how to deal with clients, deal with contracts, and all basically run the entire business by myself. And luckily I'm when I married my wife, she is a classically trained musician. So, and she's also a scientist. So she could help me out in a lot of aspects where I had no idea what to do. And she's like, no, 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 we do it this way.
Oh, well, that's that was fortuitous.
Yeah. And she loves film scores too. So that was a big plus right there.
Well, the great thing about learning by doing is you're getting it hands-on. One of the things I know, I do a lot of talk with instructors and do a lot of guest speaking. They can teach quote radio in a classroom, but until you're live on the air, it's like two separate beasts.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, there are a lot of things about film scoring that I'm sure school would have been better because I recently did another interview. And when I told the guy, I said, I wish I could have went back to when I was 12, 13, and I could have, I would have told myself, look, you do need to go to school for this. If this is what you want to do, this is what you need to go to school for. But you are right, though, by just going out there and doing, I have learned maybe more than I would have in school. So I don't know. It was kind of a, rock and a hard place. If you go to school for it, you'll learn one way, you learn the book way of doing it. But if by the street smart way, I guess you could say you might learn something that you wouldn't learn in school. So yeah, it's got its advantages and disadvantages.
All right, well, I've got to move into then some of the composers that I know I love and I'm drawn to, but there are so many, and you could argue there are so many different ways of approaching a film soundtrack because I can go in one hand, the Jerry Goldsmiths, the John Williams,
Yeah.
the old school orchestral, just massive symphonic sound to Daft Punk,
Yeah.
doing the score to the latest Tron movie or Mad Max Fury Road, the Junkie XL.
Yeah, Tom Hulkenberg.
And I'm like, two different completely schools of thought on how you create a soundtrack, and yet both, I would argue, equally effective for the kind of films that they're doing the scores to.
Especially Mad Max, because there was a lot of moments in there, even though the score is mainly pure adrenaline driven, you have a certain moments in there where it's all orchestral strings and brass coming in there. It's very, classical, almost operatic sound coming in there for this, giant car chase film. And then you have, like you're talking about with John Williams, like with Jaws, with the townspeople, and it's almost like a march.
Mhm.
And at the same time, it's like when you first hear this, you're going, this does this really fit the scene? But you can't really imagine that scene without that music.
So I guess
And
my question with that, do you have composers that you're drawn to, or do you kind of like are all over the place? It doesn't matter as long as it's music. You just love them all.
I do have my certain type of composer. I mean, of course, John Williams, definitely. I consider him like the grandfather of film scoring, even though he's not. There were obviously a lot more before him, but John Williams is really right there at Star Wars, Jaws, Superman, Indiana Jones. The iconic themes, but then also like Hans Zimmer, Inception and Interstellar and the Sherlock Holmes films. There's so many that he's done, Pirates of the Caribbean, and then I also like Junkie XL. So, and of course Daft Punk, what they did with that film, that is still an amazing score. And so I really I have my select group of composers that I really go to. It's John Williams, Marco Beltrami, who did the Scream films. I really love his style. Christopher Young is one of them. Hans Zimmer, and then probably the ended up would be Christopher Young. But I will generally listen to just about every type of film score I can get my hands on.
Do you learn by listening? Do you listen and go back and watch the movie and go, okay, why does this work here? Are they in a minor key here and that's why it feels more ominous, or they're in a major here and it sounds more heroic? I mean, do you kind of process it that way?
I do. I'll sit there and back when I was first starting out, I would listen to something or I'd watch a film and I'm like, how did they do that? I want to sit there and I would spend like hours at a time trying to figure out how exactly they did that, how exactly they got to this point. Where did they get this sound from? How did they do that? What kind of strings? So I would sit there and I was basically, again, I was teaching myself how to come up with this sound. How did they do this? And we're like, okay, well, then I would sit there once I got it. I'm like, why did they get here? Why are they using this key here? And I would try out different scenarios. I'm like, well, if I play the key like this, what kind of a reaction do I get? And Hans Zimmer said it best in one of his master classes. He's like, when you're composing, you're basically creating a question and an answer at the same time. And he is 100% right. And that's what I was doing. I was creating the question and giving an answer. And I was coming up with different answers to see which one worked and why it worked. So absolutely, definitely, I still do that.
Well, going through your IMDb, you have, I think, 64 credits or something like that. And most of them seem to be, or most of them are in either the horror or that genre. What drew you to that genre?
Man, I was like I was saying earlier to Alan before we started recording. One of the first themes I learned how to play on keyboard was Halloween, the Halloween theme by John Carpenter, and it was just one of those things when I come up with it. I've always been into horror films. The first film that I can remember is Maximum Overdrive, which is one reason why I like the soundtrack so much. And that was Stephen King's first and only directorial debut. And I really don't know. Horror is just one genre that you can have so many different genres all in one film. You have a sad moment, you can have a comedic moment, you can have an action moment, and the score reflects that every step of the way. And there's been a lot of times where I've had to do all of those different genres all in one film. So I think it's more the reason why I'm more drawn to horror is because the challenge. I can challenge myself to do so many different things with one genre of film.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about horror, because one would argue sound is so incredibly important to creating the mood and the atmosphere, especially in a horror film. You have to know when to use the silence to your effect and when to enhance what's going on in a creepy movie. how much of what you want to do is what you want to do, and how much is it the director going, no, 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 this isn't what I wanted?
Well, it depends on the film, really, because there's been a lot of moments where the director's given me complete free reign and said, "Here, just have at it." And there have been some moments where I'll do that, and the director goes, "Nah, that's not what I want." I'm like, "Well, you're telling me you're giving me free reign, so what do you want?" Or there's been moments where the director will say one thing, and then the producers will come in and say, "Oh, no, let's dial this back a little bit." And I'm going, "Okay, it's whatever you want." So, like I said, it really depends on the film. There have been some moments though where the director has actually fought for me. Say, "No, this is what's going to work. This will help the film. This will tell the story in a better fashion. Let's just let him do his thing."
Yeah, so take me through that, because I have a video production company. I'm on the directing side. I usually do the script writing. I will come up with the shot lists. I'm very analytical that way. Don't I need a set designer for colors, and I need to have a lighting person for light and everything. But when it comes to composition, I can sit with a client and say, here's the story I think we're telling. And so I can do all of that on paper. I don't waste time setting up. There's no shoot going on, and then all of a sudden realize halfway through the shoot, oh, this is not what we wanted. It's very easy for me to do that all with a client, but sound is a lot more difficult to say, here's what I think it's going to sound like, without actually creating something. So do you bring samples? Do you bring ideas from other movies and say, I'm kind of seeing it this way, but with maybe a touch of this? I'm like, how do you work with a client when trying to convince them you've got an idea of how their film should sound musically?
Actually, a combination of all of it. I will sit there. Sometimes the director will come to me, this is kind of what I've got in my head. This is kind of what we're thinking. And I've even gotten, some music from John Williams, with Jurassic Park. And, they're like, okay, for this, one scene right here, I was thinking something like this. Or sometimes, a lot of times I will get the script ahead of time, and I'll be able to read it, or I will get the film ahead of time, and I'll sit there and I make sure they send me a copy of the film with no temp music, no temporary music in there at all. That way I can get my own feeling and observe it and I will create a couple of samples and send it to them. It's like, this is my feeling. This is, the emotion that it's giving me. This is what I think the story needs. And we will just kind of go back and forth as far as the director's vision, what he's thinking, and see if we can come to like an agreement, like basically get in sync with each other, So yeah, it's really a combination of all that. I will also send, different samples. They're like, okay, well, I read the script, and this is, this score right here is what I'm thinking, or this one creepy piece from War of the Worlds by John Williams is what I'm thinking for this one scene right here, something to this effect, but it's going to be in my style, basically.
So as you go into each different film, how do you look at the music? I know for some, for some movies, it's almost like the music is another character. For example, Star Wars, you always know what's going on when a certain piece is played. Do you look at it that way, or do you have another approach to it?
No, I look at it because music, I've always said music is the backbone of the film. It is the driving force of the film. It is the driving force of the story. It is there to enhance everything. It is there to enhance the visuals, the story, the characters, the emotion, everything. So it is essentially its own character. And it has to be like that. And it has to know when to stop, when to be quiet, when to become bigger and bolder than what you're seeing on the film. And if you do that just right, you will not even notice the scores there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know some films, you want the music to stand out. You want it to be kind of at the forefront. But yeah, you're right. I guess for a lot of films, you want it to be to set the mood, but you don't want it to be distracting.
Because the one thing you don't want it to distract you to the point, because there's nothing worse than sitting there watching a car chase happen, or somebody getting stalked by the killer, and this weird music comes out of nowhere, and you're just like, wait, what just happened? And then you're taken out of the story, and you're just like, well, now I can't get back into this because this weird music scene.
Right.
You got 70s porn music coming in.
Always a distraction.
Yeah, always a distraction. But it really is. If you do not have the right tone or the right setting with the music, it will definitely take your audience out of the film, and that's the last thing you want. You want them to stay engaged. So a good score is vital to your film.
Well, let me add on to what Walt was saying, because I do think that you have like the Hans Zimmers who create just such interesting sounds that match the frenetic action that's happening on the screen. But then you have the John Williams who says, I also need to create themes to give audible clues as to now we're back with the good guys, or now we're with the bad guys, or now we're with this character versus that character. And I think sometimes that's so subtle, but yet it's so distinct because it does have now call outs to characters. Do you work similarly with characters versus, let's say, action sequences?
Yeah, definitely. I always try to give their overall film its own theme, because to me, I feel like it needs that. Every film needs to have its own distinct style and distinct theme. But throughout the entire film, you're going to have all these different characters, and you want to identify with them musically. So the main character, I usually try to give them their main theme, so to speak, and even if it's just a single instrument, you always want to know. Oh well, I know he's there because this little motif happened, or here's his best friend, and because I heard this acoustic guitar come in there. So yeah, you definitely need to do that, in my opinion. Now, there are a lot of composers out there that don't do that, and they still create fantastic scores. But that's always something. I think I probably got that from John Williams, because it's just about every film. He always has a theme for just about every character almost. Even like for Jaws itself, the town itself has its own theme, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's hard not to be influenced by John Williams, I would imagine.
Oh no, God, money. I mean, the man is a legend. I mean, he's like semi-retired, but he's still working and still putting out fantastic scores. And oh man, yeah, no, you can't be a composer and not be influenced by John Williams. It's impossible to do.
I think I was saying recently that Steven Spielberg is probably the filmmaker of my youth, but John Williams would be the composer of my youth.
No doubt.
Definitely. And when I started piecing it all together, like who John Williams is, I'm like, well, wait a minute, he scored Jurassic Park. Okay, so then he did I'm like, oh, he did Star Wars. Oh, Superman. Oh, Jurassic Park. Oh, wow. This movie here, and it just started kind of like clicking. I'm like, oh wait, he does every Spielberg movie. Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Right. Every great movie we remember as kids.
I mean, just think of all the themes. I mean, E.T., Harry Potter. Even my kids, they know the Harry Potter theme in that Harry Potter world thanks to John Williams.
And as soon as you hear that Harry Potter theme come up, you're automatically transformed in this very magical world, and you're just like a little kid. You're like, hey, this is great. Well, even with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the Harry Potter prequel spinoff, that was not John Williams, but they opened the film up with John Williams' theme.
Right.
And if they didn't have that, you wouldn't get that character identification of, oh, this is the Harry Potter world.
All right. So are there any up and coming composers that you are really enjoying, the eventual replacements for the now passed away James Horner from a few years ago? John Williams is on the end of his career. Jerry Goldsmith's no longer with us. I mean, so many of these composers of the films that I grew up with, and I'm trying to pay attention now to these new guys that are in like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the DC world, and it's all these folks, a lot of them I've never even heard of all of a sudden.
They are kind of coming out of the woodwork. I mean, because again, it goes back to, it's now more accessible for composers to come out, because especially because of the whole pandemic, you have to work remotely, and you can use your computer to talk to your clients now. You can use your computer to make the music. You can score the entire film. A lot of the standout composers to me that I'm noticing, a lot of the up and coming ones, is one of them for sure is Benjamin Wallfish. He come from Hans Zimmer's group at Remote Control Productions. He scored The Invisible Man. Let's see, the new Mortal Kombat film. He did Blade Runner 2049 with Hans Zimmer. I mean, he's doing a lot of great work, and he's really bringing out one of the films, Shazam, that he scored for DC, it really has a John Williams feel for it, but his own way. Another one, like you were talking about with all these Marvel movies and stuff, Henry Drackman, he's another good one that's coming out. I mean, his style is fantastic. Brian Tyler is another one. That guy is just so versatile. It's amazing. He goes from Fast and Furious to the new Angelina Jolie movie that just came out, directed by the Taylor Sheridan who did Yellowstone. I can't remember the name of the movie now. Those Wish Me.
Yeah, they Wish Me Dead.
Yeah, I mean, and the score for that is very dramatic and emotional feeling, type score, not Fast and Furious, Vin Diesel, and everything else. So yeah, those ones right there are the ones that are really kind of stand out to me.
I'm going to bring up one that has been he's not brand new, but I just every time I see his name, I'm always going to be interested in the music, and that's Michael Giacchino.
Oh yes.
I fell in love with him when I watched the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot, and I was like, this music is so catchy and infectious, and immediately becomes part of the movie. And now I will just listen to that score all the time.
Michael Giacchino is a fantastic composer, and I really want to kick myself for not mentioning him just now. Makes me a bad composer. No, seriously, Michael's work is beyond light years of what anybody else is doing right now. I mean, he really is, because like you just mentioned, Star Trek, we covered that on our podcast. And one of the things that was very hard and crazy to find out, that he basically was coming up with like 20 different themes for that film. And until eventually he had to just throw everything out, start from scratch, and came up with this theme that he come up with and sent it to him and said, what do you think? I think this is the theme. And they're like, this is fantastic. This is our Star Trek. This is what we want. And he encompassed the original style, but having his own theme and still have the fans just fall in love with it was amazing that he could do that he pulled it off, because it's still a fantastic score.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and I would argue with that, and JJ, I think, said it somewhere, you had to at least bring in the original bars of the classic Star Trek, so that way everybody goes, okay, it's classic Trek, and then, okay, now it's new Trek, but at least there's the bridge. And it's like the honor or the homage to the original helps bridge that gap.
It really did. And there's this one scene where the ship's going up into space for the first time. Kirk just got on the ship, his face is still all bloody and everything else. If you listen very closely, there's like 2 or 3 notes of the very original theme in there. And then it goes into his theme. And I was like, that is amazing.
It was genius.
It really was. It really was genius for him to do that. And I was like, yeah, I like this guy.
Yeah, even I'm not a real musical person. I love music, but as far as the science of it, it's always kind of eluded me. But even I caught that and had that, that real tie-in back to the nostalgia of the original Star Trek for me.
Now, another piece for that Star Trek film that I really liked was the one scene at the beginning where they cut, most of the sound effects out, and they had just the music playing.
It's the duality of the young Kirk being born at the same time his dad's dying, and you're seeing life and death instantaneously. I'm talking about that brings me to tears every single time.
Same here, because when we had the review and I'm sitting there watching it, and it was normally my wife and I will sit there back and forth, start bouncing notes off each other and everything else. But that one moment, we were both just watching it, and it was like we had seen it for the very first time again. And yeah, I'm right there with you. It was like almost to the verge of tears because it was so beautiful.
It is. It's emotionally evocative, and that just adds to the feel. To me, that's what movies are about. I get transported, and I get sucked in, and I get so invested that I have emotional responses to what's happening.
Exactly. That's what I've been saying this whole time. That you don't want to be taken out of that story. You want to stay in there, and if you can pull that off, then it makes us composers happy.
I'm going to bring up one more composer that is, and only because the movie, as far as I'm concerned, is my all-time favorite film. I love movies. I'm a big fan of film, but the achievement of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think of it as one big long movie, but Howard Shore,
Yes.
he is every bit as important to the success of that trilogy with his film score as I think as what Peter Jackson managed to pull off on the screen, because the two are inseparable. I don't know how you would. It'd be like Star Wars wouldn't be as good without John Williams' music. I don't think Lord of the Rings, the reason it's so good is because the music is so good to complement a fantastic film.
That score is beautiful from start to finish. That's all it is. And there's so many different themes, and he went so classical with it. There were a lot of moments, again, it goes back to John Williams. There are a lot of John Williams, sounds in there. But that score from start to finish, that's one of that, you're talking about On the Verge of Tears. If you just listen to it, it's especially like, God, I cannot remember the track. It's just completely lost my head. But the actor, Billy Boyd, came in and sung for this one track. It's hard for me to listen to it, especially in the car, because I will start crying like a little baby.
Right.
It's just one of those scores when you listen to it, you get invested, and it really does pull at the heartstrings. But then it also has like a lot of these, dramatic action beats in there. But even with those action beats, it's still got a lot of soul to the theme. It's got a lot of emotion to the theme, to the point where it's like, it doesn't really feel almost like an action film. You feel more like, oh, this person's fixing to die. You can tell from the music. It's one of those type of scores. It's kind of hard to listen to sometimes because you're like, you get a little too invested just listening.
Well, and this is where I'm going to make one little comment. You said how music shouldn't distract you, and I don't think music does. Otherwise, if it's distracting me in a negative way, then I'm done. But if I am thinking in the film, this music is incredible, that to me is a good compliment where I'm aware of
Right.
it. Maybe it's because I love music so much that I become aware of it. But my wife and I like kayaking, and we did this last summer. We had a 5-hour float. We played all 3 of the Lord of the Rings movie soundtracks back to back to back on the river. And I was like, okay, here's the scene where this is happening. And I could, in my head, replay everything that was happening on the screen. And my wife and I were just talking about, okay, remember this scene, and here's the scene here, and this is when he's about to jump. And it's amazing to me that you can encode such sense memory that the music is evoking the images in your head.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. Yeah, there are moments where if you can, listen to the score while you're watching the film, and I think it's more like if you're a fan of film music, you will notice the music more. But the average, audience member doesn't really pay attention to that. They don't really pay attention to the film score. But like you were talking about how you're such a big fan of film scores, you're going to notice that. You're going to notice these subtle nuances, throughout the entire thing. Oh, I need to take, note of that. So when you go back and listen to it, you're like, oh, that was that scene I was talking about. So yeah.
Well, Chris, I guess one of your more recent endeavors is that you've now gotten into the world of podcasting.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into podcasting?
I had done a podcast several years ago, back before podcasting really kind of took off. It wasn't my podcast, though. I was brought on as a producer, and it was basically I was just editing the episodes and go from there and come up with some ideas. And then the co-host of that show had to go work on Fast and Furious 8, and that which kind of left it where I was brought on as a co-host, and it just kind of went from there. But sadly, the podcast didn't last. Both of us got a lot of really busy, basically, and it was it just really fell apart, and it was sad to do that too. And I always wanted to get back into it. I always wanted to do another podcast. And I was talking to my wife one day, and she said, well, why don't we do one? I'm like, okay, what would we do? What kind of podcast would this be? And she said, why don't we do one of film scores? I'm like, you kind of got a point here. I said, because you're classically trained where I'm not, but I'm a film composer where you're not. So we do have a difference of opinion on this. I'm like, okay, so how are we going to do this? So that's when we come up with the idea for measuring the score. We listen to a score by itself and kind of, judge it against, listening to it on its own. And then we watch the film and listen to it to see if it works or not. And then we come up with 3 different criteria. Does it work for the film? And, we kind of talk about back and forth. And usually we kind of agree on it, but there have been a couple of where we don't.
Mhm.
And then we also talk about do we have a favorite scene or favorite score? Because if we do not have a favorite scene or favorite score, then that score does not work for the film. It just
That makes
something,
sense.
yeah, something needed to be completely, redone. And then the last criteria is what could have been done different. And that's basically just our opinion saying, hey, they might could have, added something here, or like our recent episode, we're talking about Beverly Hills Cop. Fantastic theme, but unfortunately, it's just way too repetitive of a score.
Mhm.
He just keeps playing the theme over and over and over and over. And then it's a great theme. And I mean, Harold Faltermeyer won a Grammy for it. But when you go back and listen to it, it's just the same thing over and over. And then he'll come up with something new and keep playing that. And then, the theme comes back, and then he goes back to the thing again. Then he comes up with something new, and then it just keeps repeating. So that's one of the things. And so we just kind of went from there, and the response that we're getting, it's incredible, because everybody's like saying the same thing. Oh, I just never really thought about a film score like that.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, it's so funny. You say something, and I keep trying to type to Walt. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize. I'm just so into this is my thing, the films and movies.
Well, I know, and that's
stuff.
the funny thing is I'm the one who found Chris, and but like this is totally in your wheelhouse.
It is.
And so I'm like, all right, talk amongst yourselves. I'm just going to listen.
I promise I'll start looking for a moonshine masher pretty soon for you.
I'm always looking for one of those as well.
But you mentioned about Harold Faltermeyer, but I mean, that was so popular in the 80s. I mean, he scored so many films, including Top Gun, with that same kind of repetition where you use a lot of the keyboard notes, and you're like deconstructing and reconstructing the same basic theme, but just coming at it from a different angle almost. And
right.
And I will argue, I watched a documentary on Beethoven, and they were talking about his Fifth Symphony is really very similar. It's like, okay, we all know the dun 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 dun, but then the rest of that whole movement is like, well, let's play with those notes going this way, and let's play with those notes going this way, and let's play with. Now, granted, more instrumentation and a lot more audacious than what Harold Faltermeyer, but similar to what you were just describing. Like, well, that's kind of what Beethoven was doing. He's tinkering around with just the note structure, just to kind of play around with it, as if how many ways can we play these notes? So, I mean, it worked in the 80s, but every 80s soundtrack had that synth background for so many of those action movies.
Well, even like I was talking about Halloween. Halloween is a very, repetitive score, because he comes up with the theme. He has Laurie's theme, and then he has a couple other tracks, and he just repeats those same tracks over and over, but he plays it in a different way, but it's still the same thing over and over. And the day we have to do that score, it's going to be kind of hard.
But I would argue John Carpenter was well enough aware to use a lot more silence in his movie, whereas Beverly Hills Cop has music everywhere just because they thought you should have music in every scene unless it's dialogue.
And see, that was the problem we came up with when we were judging that score, and we're going, okay, the score's good, the theme is fantastic, and rightfully so, he should have won that Grammy. But at the same time, it's like there could have been something more, because by the time you get to Beverly Hills Cop 2, it automatically starts up with variety. There, even though it's the same thing, there's different instrumentation in there every so often. And I even went back and listened to the score all the way through. And even though there are a lot of moments where he repeats himself, there's still something different in that, repetition. There's still something like a different drum beat, or different, pattern, or a different way he introduces, the Axel F theme,
mm-hmm.
or as we found out is called the banana theme, because it was originally written for the banana in the tailpipe. And they liked it so much, they're like, hey, let's make this the main theme.
That's awesome.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about it was really popular back in the 80s. I mean, the man got his own music video because of that theme. That doesn't happen every day.
Right.
I thought that was great when I saw that. And I was like, and it's just Harold Faltermeyer in a trench coat walking around in front of a green screen to, Beverly Hills Cop in the background.
All right. Well, we've been asking a lot about and getting way too many side trails on composers. Let's talk about, your career for a moment, because you are doing a podcast talking about film scores, but your main principal focus is being a film composer. So do you remember the first film you ever did, and then I want to also tie with that. Do you remember the most hard film to do as far as to try to get that score right where you wanted it?
The first film I ever did, and I do remember it, it was in December of 2003. It was a Halloween fan film, and it was called Halloween the Boogeyman. And they were originally going to go with the original Halloween score by John Carpenter. And I found the contact information page, and I sent the director a track. It was like my own version of the Halloween theme. It was the same thing, but it's just a lot of different instrumentation. And I sent it to him, and I said, I told him who I was, and I was like, I would really like to score your film, because I had scored a lot of short projects that I had done, but they were not released publicly. They were just for my own, keepsakes. And this was the first time I ever, reached out to someone and said, hey, I would like to score your film. So when I reached out and the director wrote me back, he told me we were going to go with the original score. We decided we're going to go with you. And I remember I was so nervous, and I was like, this is just like a little fan film. I wasn't even getting paid for it. It was just something I wanted to do. And when I got through, I was so happy with it. I was like, yes, I scored a movie. And then like several years later, I went back. I'm like, oh, what was I thinking?
We've all got to have that first one, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Definitely. And what was great about it, though, the director decided to do a almost like a director's cut, and he like cut a lot of scenes out and filmed new scenes for it. And he's like, we want, would you like to come back? I was like, please let me rescore it. Please let me do this. This was terrible. Please let me do this. The hardest film that comes to mind was a film called Chemical Peel. And it was the first one that had a pretty big release to me, because it was released by Lionsgate. And the director came to me. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for several years, well over a decade now. And he come to me and said, my original composer, unfortunately, is very sick at the moment, and he's too busy with work. How would you feel about coming on board and scoring just a few scenes for me and everything else? I watched the film and I was like, okay, well, here's what I think. And I scored one scene in particular. And when I sent that to him, he said, you nailed the feeling. You nailed what this film needs. How would you feel about scoring the rest of the film? And I was excited, because it was the story of it was great. It was these girls. They were all trapped in a cabin due to a fog that was moving in from a chemical train that had exploded in the nearby region. So this fog could basically melt you from the inside out. So the paranoia and the fear started to mount as the film progresses, and the score really had to reflect that isolation, that fear, that terror that these poor women are having to go through. And there was one moment in particular, Hank Braxton, the director, said, for this one scene, I would like to have a solo violin. And he had some temp music in there. And I worked off of a computer, and I'm sitting there going, I don't have a solo violin. How am I going to do this? He goes, I have someone that can do this for you. I just need you to come out with the notes. So it was the first time in my career that I had to have sheet music, play it out, and have a metronome playing for the solo violinist, send it off to her. And then when I get this back, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever written before. And I was like, this is a composer. This is what a composer does right here. And it was the one moment I was like, I actually felt like a composer. I felt like I
get to keep the title.
Yeah, I earned this title this time. But it was very hard, because then I had to make the conscious choice of, I was like, okay, the solo violin is going to be the only thing that plays, because originally I had a lot more strings and piano. And when I sent it to the director, I was like, look, let's just leave it like this. I think this will be, the best choice right here. And there was a lot of scenes I had to go back and redo to fit that violin, fit that sound, fit that style. So a lot of things that I had already worked on and different themes had to be completely changed around to fit what was there, because then that one violin piece basically became the basis for the entire movie. because it was just one violin, and that really drove home the isolation feel. So that was the first film that come to my mind when you said, what was the hardest? I mean, there's been a lot of them. Every film has its own challenge, but it was the hardest, but it was the most rewarding for me.
Now, do you take that violin because it was a real recording versus something that was synthesized, and do you, I don't know what the right word is, do you encode it or save it so that way you can then build music synthetically off of it?
I had the notes already written down. I had the notes already into the computer, so I could basically work with it however I needed to. But for that particular piece, I just left it alone. I didn't mess with it. I didn't add anything to it because what she did was fantastic enough. And I basically just stripped everything down, and I just kind of, made that the forefront of everything. And there were a couple of pieces later on where she would have something else for me, and I did kind of build a little bit for it, but that one piece in particular, no, I just left it alone. Now, will I do that now? Yes, sometimes I will. I mean, it really depends on the film, and it really depends on the story and everything else.
Gotcha.
But for that moment, no, I couldn't do it because I was like, no, I can't do this track. I love it too much.
Well, have you ever had a film that you started working on that you kind of got into it and realized, man, I really wish I had not taken this project on?
Why did I say yes?
You don't have to name names, but
there have been a few where it's been like, oh man, I shouldn't have done this. But I mean, it would not detract me from doing what I need to do. I would still, come at it, like I do every score, and just give it everything that I could to make sure the film got what it needed, and got what the director and everybody else involved were happy with the score and everything else. But yeah, there have been some. I'm not naming any names or a film, but yeah, there have been some. I'm just like, oh, okay.
Well, as we are winding down the interview piece, I know we've got a few more minutes, but are you in the midst? I know COVID threw a lot of wrenches in a lot of people's timelines, but things have been opening up, at least here in Georgia where we record. I know you're in the Southeast right now, but you could, like you said, you could do stuff for people everywhere because a lot of stuff can be done remote. Are you in the midst of projects right now? Do you see work ramping up as we are moving through 2021?
Right now, mainly the podcast is the one thing, the creative outlet that has really taken the forefront of everything. I since things are starting to ramp up, though, I am getting a few kind of hits from some directors that I'm really good friends with, and they're coming to me, hey, we got a couple of projects we're going to need you for, later on. I even got to create a theme for another person's podcast. So even though it's still in the podcast realm, I'm still getting music jobs.
Cool.
So it was great.
Cool. Well, because the reason I want to do that is because I know you're going to try to hang with us, but I want to make sure before we wrap up with you, we want everyone to know not only how to find your podcast, but how to find you, because people, who knows, a year from now, they could be involved in a film project. They could be involved with a video project for their company, and they want a special score made for that or whatever. Never hurts to have people to reach out to. So before I ask all that, Walt, do you have anything as a follow-up for Chris before we get to his details?
Well, I think that was just going to be my one last thing was, have you begun to see work in that podcasting realm? Because I know, particularly in the bigger, higher end podcasts with a lot of money behind them, they're looking to stand out. And some of the theme songs that I'm hearing are obviously an attempt to do that. And I just wanted to see if that's a realm that you and some of your compatriots in your world have started to dive into.
Well, really, I mean, if anybody comes to us with anything, we'll usually like, yeah, sure, no problem. and that's basically what it was. It was the other person's podcast. It was Sean from Cheap Seat Reviews. He come to me and said, hey, I really like your theme for your podcast, because my wife and I created the theme for the podcast. We sat down together and was like, okay, if we're going to do this podcast together, we're going to create this theme together. So that's what we did. And Sean told me, he's like, I really like that theme. So he was like, can you create something for me? Because, what I'm using is copyrighted material. So we want something original, but also speaks for the podcast. And we went through so many different revisions, and once I finally got something that, fit the podcast and fit what he liked, he played it the other day, and he was telling everybody, "Hey, we got new intro music, everybody. Thanks to Chris Lott for that."
Well, I know that our world is a little bit tricky when it comes to music and clips and things like that, because you are starting to hear of people not being too thrilled about their music being used or whatever. So I think you are going to see more and more original music.
It's never a problem until somebody starts making money.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Exactly. And see, like with our podcast, I mean, since we are a film score podcast, we consciously made a decision for season 1. We're like, okay, we're not going to have any film score music in there. Let's see how this plays out. So let's see how people like this, because you do really run the risk of, copyright infringement. And that's the last thing that I want to do. But we have been getting asked, hey, how come you guys don't have the music? A lot of the other film score podcasts have music in there. And we've been looking into the laws of it and everything else. And I think the magic window is like 10 seconds. But I think if we do have, I think for like season 2, that might be something we look into.
Here's what I've learned so far. Unless you are egregiously using it, unless you are just shamelessly marketing it, or you're just such an embarrassment that they don't want anything to do with you, if you are showing respect and homage to something and they realize you're doing a reaction to, or, and you're trying to say, listen to how this violin comes in at this moment, and you're analyzing it like a documentary, most people aren't going to come after you. I mean, because you're showing an homage to them. You're not denigrating them. They might come after you if you go, listen how shitty this is, Here's an example of how not to do a soundtrack.
Right.
But because, but there's just so much content, and at some point, the laws are going to have to catch up with the digital world, because how do you stop somebody? Let's say, here's an example. I did a show with a buddy of mine in another podcast. We were doing the discography of Metallica, going one song at a time through each album. One podcast was each album.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the host of this show got really nervous because they got one of those automatic algorithms picked up a Michael Jackson song in one of their podcast episodes. And it's like, all right, that's it. No more music. We're never like, well, wait a minute. Even Metallica has all of their songs free on their YouTube channel. We're not charging for the podcast. We're not making any money. We're just talking about the songs and playing a little bit and then talking about it and then talking over it in the background. But he freaked out. So
right.
At some point, the laws are going to have to catch up to the rest of the real world, where we're out here doing creative things.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, even though I am a composer, and I would hate for anyone to sit there and start having my music playing on a podcast, and they're making tons of money off of it, and they're not.
But that's if they're making money,
right? If they're making money off of it. But I think what you're like you were saying, if you're looking at it more of a standpoint of, hey, this is what we liked about this score, and we just want our audience to hear what we're think about it, then yeah. So that's why I think for season 2, we've decided, my wife and I have talked about it, and we looked into the laws of it, and it's going to be one of those things as we're talking, we're like, well, that's when this piece right here, or this drum hit would happen right here, and we'll play at least 10 seconds of it.
Mm-hmm.
and stop it, and just kind of give the audience a little bit more of the show, a little bit more of the score, because it does get to the point where if you just keep talking about a film score, you can only talk about it so much.
Well, yeah, especially if somebody who has never even heard the score you're talking about, they may want to understand, what are you mentioning? What are you talking about, if they don't hear it?
And on the podcast, that's one thing that I get frustrated with myself, because I'll sit there and I'll start humming all of the bars, like
and as someone, again, who's not very musical, if I'm listening to a discussion about a piece, I really need to hear it to understand what you're talking about.
Exactly.
So I appreciate those 10-second drop-ins that allow me to go, oh yeah, I never even really realized that song was playing in the background when they gunned that guy down in The Godfather. And it really is helpful to me as a listener to have that. So
yeah,
hopefully they'll continue to not mess with stuff like that.
I hope not.
Well, I know one of the things that we've done in our first 2 seasons, when we were looking at a movie a minute at a time and we were looking at the scenes, I recorded the whole movie and I would drop in a line of dialogue here or there and say, and this is when Gene said this, or this is when Madeline Kahn said this, or this is, and so that way people would hear the context of it rather than us trying to reenact the scene. And, I don't think there's an issue with that because it's so short, but it's also, again, we're not charging for your benefit. We're not making money selling the movie. We're putting out a review of why we like this minute or this movie. So I wish you best of luck because I would love to hear the music that you're talking about.
Exactly. Well, tune in for season 2 then.
Season 2. All right. So before we move on to the other segments of our show, we have Chris Lott. We've been talking to a film composer, somebody who has got a podcast talking about film scores. Chris, first, how do people get in touch with you? Do you have a website, social media for your film score work if somebody is interested in at least getting a quote or at least striking up that initial conversation?
You can find me on Facebook. I've got an Instagram as well. You can find a lot of my music on YouTube. There's a lot of different short films that I have a playlist on. I have SoundCloud as well, but I never got around to doing a website. So once SoundCloud came available, I just kind of put everything on there. I also got a couple of albums on Bandcamp. A lot of different film scores that were on there as well. Chemical Peel is one of them on there.
And do they just look up Chris Lott, Christopher Lott? What's your composer name?
Just Chris Lott. Just go straight for Chris Lott, type it in there, and you should be able to find me as soon as you see Alabama.
And your podcast, what's it called and where can people find it?
The podcast is called Measuring the Score. You can find us pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts at. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Twitter is at Measure the Score. That's where I'm very active on there. My wife will sometimes hit up on the Facebook. If you send us a message on there, you can send us an email, measuringthescore@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram, definitely. Just type in Measuring the Score, you'll be able to find us. So yeah, pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts, that's where you can find us.
Fantastic. Well, I know you want to hang out for a little bit with us, and hopefully you'll be able to, because we've got, ironically, a film segment coming up. Hey. So you want to hang out for a little bit?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Walt, I don't know what the voters in our listener group, our private Facebook page, what they voted for, but we have a film review coming up, a film segment we call...
God, what is this? Stop it! I gotta get me out of this house!
So, Alan, just to level set people here, calling this a film may be very overly generous. Our listeners voted for the classic Llamageddon.
Llamageddon!
Wow. The 2015...
that's the Disney flick, right? Where the guy gets turned into a llama?
Sure. Disney would absolutely have you hunted down and killed for saying that. This gets a towering 3.9 on IMDb, which honestly I don't think is fair, and I'll tell you why. Just to start with, here's the summary of this film, or this, whatever this is. A killer llama from outer space crash lands on Earth and brings death and destruction to everyone in its path. That in itself is pretty endearing of this movie. I
wish that was the name of the movie, Killer Llama from Outer Space.
It would have been a whole lot better, to be honest with you. And, the thing that we keep coming back to is that may or may not be true. That is just not sufficient. Because not only does he bring destruction, but he also turns people into other killer llamas. He the llama himself, who actually is played by a llama, believe it or not, Louis the llama, who has one credit on IMDb, plays the killer llama quite well. I mean, he obviously there is some special effect work here of turning his eyes red, but he does a great job playing a llama, and I have to give him credit for that. There's a guy named Dan who is played by Dan Ambassa, and of course you've never heard of him because this is the only movie he's ever been in. And he's actually credited as John Selmy, which I have no idea why. Dan changes his shirt in this every single time he's on screen, and he has 23 different t-shirts on through the course of the movie before he is mercifully killed by the killer llama. Just to give you an idea, there are, I believe, 42 cast and there are 42 cast members credited in this movie. Only one of them has a picture on IMDb, and that is James Earl Cox III, who is also credited with Desert Night, where he plays Bandit Number 2. And
oh yeah, Bandit Number 2. Good.
Of course, stand out. Yeah, I think he's one of the people who gets killed by the llama in the hot tub when the llama throws a toaster in. So, and I'm sorry, spoiler alert.
And I was so waiting to watch this movie.
Credit to the llama for ingenuity. I could use a toaster.
Oh, the llama kills people in some incredible ways in this thing. We never really have an explanation of why he's angry or why he came to Earth to kill people, but he does come in one of those horse carriers with wings on it. And
a horse trailer with wings?
Yes, and it is something to behold. It is. I'm sure it's going to end up being like the Smokey and the Bandit car and other, vehicle props like that gets auctioned off at some point for $8. And it's bad. So the writers on this, and of course we have to give James Earl Cox III, who's the sole picture on IMDb. He's also one of the writers, along with Howie Doohan. I hope they never write anything else.
Wait, his name's Howie Doohan?
Howie Doohan. Yeah. Yeah.
I just pulled this up on IMDb, and did you happen to take a look at the composer name?
I did not.
It's Spooky Mulder. But the way it's spelled out, it's SPXXKYMVLDXR.
Wow.
Spooky Mulder.
Oh my gosh. Well,
obviously not taking themselves too seriously with their naming credits.
I think he plays like 4 notes through the whole thing. So it's barely something worth crediting. The one review on IMDb is an 8 out of 10. And the person who gave this review is probably like the father of one of the cast members, but they title it So Bad in All the Right Ways. And I would have to agree with that. This is a difficult movie in quality and writing and all kinds of other things, but it's actually watchable in some strange way. Every time you kind of go, okay, I've had enough, something crazy happens. Like the llama jumps on somebody and with his 2 hooves, he just starts punching this guy. When people die, it's like 14 times more blood than is really in the human body. They get sprayed all over the place.
Full Evil Dead blood is squirting everywhere.
Yes.
Like 14 gallons.
Exactly. I mean, it is gallon upon gallon upon gallon. It's like a 55-gallon drum blows up.
Oh.
And then every time you think, okay, the movie's over, the killer llama's back. And he's even more pissed or more powerful. So there's also, just to warn you, a lot of drug use, probably by the writers as well. There is a lot of just meaningless minutia that goes on, like the people getting high and dancing and Dan coming in a new shirt and stuff like that. But it's actually okay. I think it's about 90 minutes, a little more, a little less than 90 minutes. And you can get through it. It takes some self-discipline, but you can get through it. But it is a little difficult at times. But every time you start to get bored, just hang on. Something else cool is coming.
Hang on.
Louis the llama does not leave you hanging for long.
Well, credit to them for having an actual llama, not somebody in a suit.
It is an actual llama. I would say that there are probably some times when it's actually someone, controlling the llama arms that are punching the people. But otherwise, yes, Louis the llama is a very fine actor.
Best actor in the whole thing.
Probably my favorite llama actor.
One thing I never thought I would hear: when the llama is punching someone,
Leave it to the wilder ride, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm going to have to check this film out.
Only on this podcast will you hear that term.
I just want to hear what Spooky Mulder did.
Yep. Well, that is something that we want you folks out there listening. If you have not joined our private listeners group on Facebook, hey, you get a chance to be part of the weekly poll. Walt puts out there 3 different movies that are available. He has a certain criteria. I'm not sure that I want to be part of that criteria board, but he has a certain criteria, and you get to pick which movie he is forced to sit through, take notes on, and bring you a review each week right here on The Wilder Ride.
Right now, the criteria is not great movie that doesn't involve sharks.
You don't want sharks. You've had enough sharks. Okay.
They all have sharks somehow.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move to our news segment, a segment we like to call
It's No Bullshit.
And it's not, because we read it online. And Walt,
Right.
You've got the first news story.
I do, and this one comes from our good friends at the Tampa Bay Times. So you know what this means. It's a Florida guy.
It's a Florida man story.
Hey, Florida man.
Cell phone left behind in Pinellas burglary and carjacking leads to arrest.
Brutal.
Oh, tell us more, Walt.
A St. Petersburg man was linked to an armed burglary and carjacking after he left his cell phone behind at the scene, Pinellas Sheriff's deputies said. Police said that at about 7:45 a.m. on April 20th, a man who lives in the 6700 block of Gulfport Boulevard South awoke and went to his living room to begin working from home. He noticed his laptop was missing, then saw a burglar in his kitchen. A police report said the burglar had the victim's replica samurai sword in one hand and the victim's vehicle keys in the other.
You hawked a Hattori Hanzo sword.
The burglar then ordered him to pick up a clothes hamper filled with stolen items from the residence and told him to bring it out to the resident's truck.
Okay, that's just adding insult to injury. Not only are you getting robbed, you're having to load up the vehicle with all the stash of your own house.
And you're having to do it at
sword point?
Samurai sword point. The victim did as ordered, and the burglar left in the man's truck. The man called law enforcement authorities. Deputies determined the burglar had left a cell phone inside the residence. They obtained a search warrant and found several photos and videos of the suspected burglar on the phone. They determined the phone belonged to Dominion Grady, 24, of St. Petersburg. They also found the sword, which had Grady's fingerprints on them. The arrest report stated Grady was arrested Tuesday on charges of armed burglary and carjacking. He also was charged with resisting arrest and also is facing multiple drug charges. Bail on the burglary and carjacking charges was set at $150,000 each, and Grady remained in jail on Sunday. Can't believe he doesn't have $350,000 sitting there. An assistant public defender has filed a not guilty plea on his behalf. Grady has an arrest history in Pinellas County that includes previous charges of burglary, robbery, and surprisingly, drugs.
It's no bullshit.
Leave it to the Florida man, always making the state of Florida proud.
You can always count on him.
I wonder if he's seen Lamageddon.
He may be one of the writers. I didn't check.
Well, I have a story that's right up your alley, Walt, although I don't know if you'd actually even drink this. When you think of Chernobyl, you know, the famous 1986 nuclear disaster, you're probably thinking something like, the game Stalker with gas masks, radiation, strange mutants, that sort of stuff. But whatever your mental picture, though, you probably wouldn't be too thrilled about consuming anything growing in what's known as the seclusion zone. Well, Ukrainian officials agree with you as they just confiscated 1,500 bottles of moonshine made out of apples grown from Chernobyl.
Oh, that's not right.
Well, you know what's funny? This is so up my alley. That is actually my second story, too.
No kidding!
This is a first.
No, we had that one of the first ones was about the kid who stole the car and went riding in Las Vegas, joyride.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Well, I had this story because I thought of you because it was moonshine. Now, here's what's crazy. There's a group of people that are already putting out a vodka from this region called Atomik, Atomik, Atomic Vodka, that is actually grown from wheat that's being grown in the seclusion zone. But one of the things I had highlighted here, story-wise, is it said, look, any chemist will tell you when you distill something, impurities do stay in the waste product. So it's no more radioactive than any other booze on the market. I'm like, well, wait a minute. The way you're saying it makes me think there's radioactive booze on the market too? Because they're making it sound like there's no more than. Well, wait a minute. How about there should be none?
Yeah, that would be the right number.
So it's the Chernobyl Spirit Company.
Wow. So you can drink and glow in the dark at the same time.
Exactly.
Hey, look, if somebody was selling that atomic vodka, I'd give it a try. I'm a big vodka fan. I would just for the sake of saying I tried vodka made out of grain that grew out of the ground in Chernobyl. Can you imagine that?
No, I don't want to imagine that. Then I'll start writing things like Llamageddon.
Now, check this out. Scientists say they shouldn't be forbidden for selling this because they say, quote, there are other hot spots around the world that have far many more contaminants than Chernobyl right now has that are allowed to create alcohol. I'm like, wait a minute. Should we not have a sticker on our alcohol at this point if they know there's other alcohol being farmed and made and put into distribution from places worse than Chernobyl?
It's no bullshit.
I know. Isn't that disturbing?
I read this. I was like, holy shit. Maybe I should just stick to Tennessee rye or something. That's it. Just and some sour mash. I need your barefoot uncle from West Virginia to cook me up a batch. Yeah, I might go blind in a few years, but at least I know where it came from.
Yes, you're not going to glow in the dark and grow a third arm,
or your hair's going to fall out.
Well, okay, so that's my second story. You don't have a second story then, do you?
Well, actually, I have a backup story.
Okay, good.
Just in case. Now, this one comes from Bring Me the Minnesota News. Person brings possibly live mortar into Nimrod Bar in Waden County.
Holy cow.
Wait a minute, it's a perfect name for the bar for the person who would bring a live round into
That
it.
is exactly what I thought, too. I thought this had to happen. I mean, it's perfect that it happened in Nimrod. The Waden County Sheriff's Office said it got a call at 3:31 p.m. Sunday from a person who said they located a mortar that was possibly live and then brought it into the bar in the city of Nimrod.
Hey, y'all, watch this.
I was just about to say, was that his first words? Hey, y'all, check this out.
Yeah, I mean, what is this idiot thinking? Oh, I guess I'll just take this to Moe's and see what happens. Apparently,
got a
the
hammer?
individual had been with others in the Shell City Bridge with a metal detector when they located the mortar. They put it in their car and brought it into the Nimrod bar to show others. The Crow Wing County Bomb Squad responded and took possession of the mortar. The mortar, which is possibly from the Korean War era, will be disposed of in a safe manner, the release says. Now, here's the crazy thing. The picture of this mortar, this thing is all rusted. It's got algae growing on it. It looks like one good shake and it goes. It's Nimrod brought it into the Nimrod bar.
It's one good backfire of blowing up your back seat.
Yeah, there you go. So he's going to blow up a bar full of Nimrods, I guess.
It's no bullshit.
Wow.
That's just crazy. And thank you, Minnesota, for that story.
All right.
For the name.
That you could not write this. You could not write this. If you put this in a script, people would put it on and you'd get a 3.2 on IMDb saying that there's no way there'd be an actual bar named Nimrod that someone would bring some leaky Korean War vintage mortar into a bar.
Oh, no way. No way.
All right. Well, I've got the last news story. This goes to show how far people are willing to go for getting a little bit high. We all know about the internet fads of, maybe trying the Tide Pod trick and some other crazy things, but check out the local latest fad. Apparently, some people have gotten it in their heads it's a good idea to eat raw, spoiled meat.
You lose!
And we're not talking about a steak a couple of days too long in the fridge. We're talking meat in advanced stages of decomposition.
No, that's not a good idea.
Not a good idea. We're talking about meat that's green and brown and swarming with bacterial colonies.
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
The genuinely rotten stuff that you would see on maybe the cover of a death metal album or something. or crawling across the counter in a poltergeist flick.
Ugh.
Look, some of the guys claim they prefer their meat a little decomposed. They say it tastes better, but others are after a special kind of high you supposedly get from this kind of, quote, high meat. That's what they call it. Reportedly, the rotten meat produces a sense of euphoria after consumption.
It's amazing. It's astounding. But it's no bullshit.
Now, I don't know a whole lot about this, but I can tell you a story. Once upon a time, when I was very poor, very young, first married, and had a kid, so therefore I had no money, we were big into the tuna helper and hamburger helper meals. And so we used to do the tuna helper maybe once or twice a week. And I remember we had tuna helper, and I would take the leftovers to work. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I reached into the refrigerator, and I was like, pulled open a little lid. I was like, tuna helper, that was from last night. I took it to work, let it sit there so it got nice and room temperature during the first half of the day. Then I stuck it in the microwave, started eating it. I'm like, it's kind of a bit tangy. It was almost like, I don't remember it being this bright. I ate the whole thing, and then I started feeling funky. That's the only word I can tell you. I was funky, so there must be something to this. Because then I called my wife at the time, and I was like, hey, did we not put that stuff away at the right time? Did it sit out? And she goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, the stuff from last night. She goes, we ate all of it from last night. I'm like, well, then what did I take from the refrigerator? Because I had some tuna helper. She goes, oh my God, that was from 3 weeks ago. Thankfully, I don't know if I've got a cast iron stomach, if it's my time with the Navy or having lived with a military dad. I never got sick, but I really did have a weird, it wasn't euphoria, but I felt not quite right. Like there was something quite like ringing in my ears and things weren't in focus, and I felt weird. So I do not recommend this for anybody that wants to get high. Look, we live in the 21st century. You can do this so easily without eating rotten, spoiled meat and getting, E. coli or botulism or something like that. Go to Colorado, buy a bag of gummies, you're good to go.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that over rotten meat.
Yeah, I just can't imagine putting your life at risk with botulism just in that in general. Because you know what botulism does, right? It's like a neurotoxin that slowly builds in your gut and eventually starts to paralyze you to the point where you can suffocate because your lungs stop working.
Well, all the people out there that are actually going out there and doing this, you're nasty. You were just nasty people.
Yeah.
The people that do this, I'm like, and apparently it started as an internet challenge. Like, I dare you to eat a piece
of course,
rotten, green. I'm telling you, I keep meat 3 days in the fridge. If I haven't eaten leftovers in 3 days, it's out.
Yeah, that's it. If it has a eat by date and that's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. I'm certainly not keeping it around intentionally waiting for it to turn green and moldy. Ugh.
Can you imagine that? Oh, what are we having for dinner? Oh, it's going to be good in 3 weeks.
Oh, it's special. Yeah. It's been sitting out in the hot sun for about 17 days.
That's not what they mean when they say aged meat.
No, it's not.
It's brown. Now it's green.
All right. Let's get to our final segment, our entertainment segment. A segment where we like to find out what are we watching, what are we reading, and what are we listening to. And this is where our guest gets to also weigh in, especially somebody who's got a music composition background. They might have a few things they're listening to, podcast or music-wise, but we'll go to watching first. Walt, we'll go to you so we don't put any pressure on our guest. What are you watching this week that you could recommend, whether it's binging, streaming, movies, classic, or brand new?
Well, the NHL playoffs have started this week, so that's going to take some of my time. But there are two things that I'll talk about real quick from the entertainment world. I made the mistake of watching the Bruce Willis, Thomas Jane movie from 2020, Breach. Have you seen or heard of this?
No.
I really kind of thought I'd stumbled across a hidden gem because I thought, Bruce Willis is great. Thomas Jane, he's been in a lot of good stuff. It's kind of a sci-fi end of the world movie, but it turns out it's kind of a zombie like movie, and it's not very good. It's not well written. there are times when you feel like Bruce Willis realizes what kind of garbage dump this is, and
he's just phoning it in.
I think there's one scene where he's drinking from a flask, and I'm thinking he really is drinking from a flask right now as they shoot this scene. So, it's not a hidden gem. Don't waste your time. But it is on Amazon Prime if you want to check it out. I don't know why you would, but I don't recommend it. I think it has 3 stars on Amazon, but that's kind of generous. I'd maybe give it 2. I mean, it's not really good. It's a lot of cliche, a lot of whatever. But another one that I stumbled across, and I'm just finishing episode 1, is Invincible. Have you seen this, Alan?
Is that the cartoon from the same guy who had written The Walking Dead?
Yeah, and it's kind of a superhero type show. Yeah, I'm just at the end of episode 1, and it's really, really good so far. So I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of it. I've heard great things about it, heard several people recommend it, and I just kind of stumbled across it. But so far, it's really good. I'll kind of fill you all in as I go through the rest of it over the next couple weeks.
Fantastic. All right. Anything else you got for what you're watching?
Nope. I think that wraps it up.
All right, Chris, what about you? You and maybe the missus, do you have like a show or anything that you can recommend that you're binging your way through or watching?
Oh, we've been watching a lot, actually. We recently started back watching Firefly. And
there's never anything wrong with going back to the original season of Firefly.
And it got to the part in the one episode, I think it might have been the second episode, or the first or second episode, where Mal actually kicks the assassin into the jet engine of the ship. And he's like, well, darn, and it kicks him. I laughed so hard, I forgot about that scene. And then he goes right into the next guy. So here's the money that we owe. Right. He goes like, I'll never come after you. I'll never find you again. Don't worry about it. We're good. We're good.
That is a fantastic scene. Was that the train job?
I think it was the train job. Yeah. Yeah, definitely was the train job.
I became a fan of Joss Whedon's writing from that moment forward. He just managed. He's the same guy that's the same humor when Loki's having his speech and Hulk starts thumping the ground with him. I mean, that's the same humor.
Puny God. Yeah, definitely. That is the one. And it's like, and that man's playing Galaga. From the
yes. Firefly, always fantastic. What a great show that was cut short of its prime.
Yes. We watched that. We're binging that again, and we also watched The Mitchells versus the Machines, the animated feature film that came out on Netflix. Wasn't really too sure what to get from it because we saw the trailer and we're like, this looks pretty funny. It's a very weird movie, but it is hilarious, and it actually has a lot of heart to the film. A lot of family elements in there that I was not expecting watching it, because you've got Maya Rudolph, Danny McBride is doing some of the voices. I think some of the other comedians that are from SNL, they're on there doing voices for this animated feature. But there are so many funny moments in there, to the point where you have a giant killer Furby trying to attack this family. And I'm not kidding, to the point where it becomes very meta, and they go, why is this actually built? And why is it coming after us right now? And then they have to take off running because a washing machine is trying to kill them. It was a great movie. It really was. It was funny. Like I said, it was very weird, because there was a lot of moments in there where it goes almost Japanese anime style. And it's like, okay, well, that was very random for this one moment, but it was very fun. And once you get caught up in it, you start to really enjoy the movie. So yeah, I recommend The Mitchells versus the Machines.
All right. On my end, for what I was watching, I told my brother I had seen last week the Rush documentary, Beyond the Lighted Stage. He goes, oh, if you like that, check out Time Stands Still, especially because it was filmed just before Neil Peart died. And so I watched it. It was basically a documentary of the R40, or what they realized was going to be the last tour of the group Rush. Fantastic documentary. Even if you don't like the music, just the story of 3 guys that managed to be best friends for 40 years, putting out music and albums and just having a great time, and having the painful moment of the opening when Geddy Lee said, I used to retreat to my band because I thought life was so hard, and I thought this was my place I could play and I could retreat. And now I realize the hardest thing I'm ever going to have to do is say we're no longer going to be playing.
Yeah,
And-
that's a tough scene.
Yeah, poignant, really good documentary. If you've got HBO Max, speaking of Joss Whedon, I have binged episodes 1 through 6 now of The Nevers. Really, really have enjoyed the first 6 episodes. Apparently, there's going to be 12 episodes in the first season, but they're going to release 6 and then take a break and then 6 more. So I'm going to have to wait a while for the next 6. But just when I thought I had figured out what it was, it does a Joss Whedon turnaround and completely pulled the rug out from under me, and yet still works, and it's perfect. It's a great season. So check that out, The Nevers.
I was really curious as to how that was, because when I found out he had a new show out, and I'm like, I want to check that out.
I like it. I don't want to give anything away. I can just tell you it's set in 19th century Victorian England, but there's a science fiction-esque element to it. I don't know if that's the right word. A science fiction-y element to it.
Sure.
Yeah, there we go.
That eventually plays out to be more than I thought, and yet doesn't change anything about where I am. So it's just, you got to watch it. It's so good. The Nevers. And another one on HBO Max that I've been watching. I've liked Kate Winslet and the things she's done, but she's producing this one called Mayor of Easttown, where she's playing a small town detective. She's playing kind of a middle-aged mom who's technically a grandmother because she's got a 4-year-old, because her son, we find out, ended up killing himself because he was on the spectrum, got addicted to drugs. The next thing you know, he decided to off himself. She's trying to raise this kid. There's a lot going on in her life, and yet she's trying to deal with perhaps a serial killer of young girls all of a sudden. Really gritty and real, but very good, very well acted. It's called Mare, M-A-R-E. That's her name, Mare of Easttown.
Sounds interesting.
So if you got HBO Max, check those out. All right, that's all I've got for what I'm watching, so we can move maybe to a very quick segment. Walt, anything you're reading?
Well, I just bought Edward Gross's book, The 50-Year Mission, the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of Star Trek, the first 25 years.
Funny, I've got that too.
Yes, I was so brilliant that I accidentally ordered 2 copies. So I got it and started thumbing through it, and I thought, you know what? I bet Alan would like this. So I figured if nothing else, it's another book for your monstrous bookshelf. And yeah, there you go.
Hey, there it is.
So I'm looking forward to starting that. I'm going to start that here in the next couple days and see how fast I can work through that. But I think it's going to be, just from everything I'm seeing about it and thumbing through it, it looks like a great read.
I'm having to mute for a second. My dogs heard something outside, and now they're barking like freaking idiots. So we'll just go quickly to Chris. What are you reading?
I am actually still trying to read The Shining by Stephen King. It's every time I start reading it, I get interrupted and then I lose focus. And I'm like, oh yeah, I was reading that book. So yeah, but no, it's a great book. I love the storytelling that Stephen King always comes up with. I mean, what else can I say about The Shining? I mean, everybody knows the story. Everybody knows what's going on and how.
Yeah,
Stephen
but don't
King...
get the movie mixed up with the book. The book is really, really good.
Yes, and that was one thing I was definitely noticing. The book, the way the characters are written out and everything else. I'm like, this wasn't like the movie, and I'm like, oh, I love the characters a lot more than I did in the movie. I still love the movie though.
I remember reading it the first time, just getting into Stephen King when I was a teenager, and I decided I'd get all of his books and started going through it in order from Carrie to Salem's Lot to then The Shining, which is his third novel. And I just would watch the progression as a writer of horror and just how good he was at just creating a page turner in horror.
Oh yeah, definitely. But my favorite Stephen King story of all time is still 1408. I love the movie. I love the story, and they did such a great job of bending the story into the film, like to the point where you have this certain people coming through the lobby. That's in the book. You see this woman with a poodle. That's in the book. That's, and they use that straight in the movie, just like it was great. I love the story more though, because the characters and everything else, even though it was a short story, it was still wonderful. But yeah, I'm really enjoying The Shining so far because I have never read it up until now.
Awesome. I don't have anything to add to this segment. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Chris, do you have anything else you were reading?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, let's get it as we're wrapping up the show. What are we all listening to? This could be music, albums, some things we're streaming, Sirius XM channels, or podcasts. Walt, we'll go to you first.
Well, really trying to pare down how many podcasts I'm listening to.
Good luck.
It just got really out of hand. And of course, every week I listen to Radio Labyrinth, and those guys, Jeff and Tim, and I guess Dustin Lawler's on just about every week. And
don't forget Steph.
Oh, Steph. Yeah, Steph Swain. Yeah, they really put together a great podcast, and you can never watch or listen to everything that they talk about in that show. But they also talk about different things going on in culture and pop culture. So an excellent show, just a great group of folks. I really do appreciate them and enjoy their show every week.
Yeah, if you're a Gen Xer or you're aware of the Gen X history, they're coming at pop culture and entertainment from a Gen X perspective. Really, really fun podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had Tim on a couple times. We've had Steph on, and Jeff's coming up here in a couple of weeks, and then we'll get with Dustin and get him on as well. So really just great folks. And then I know we've mentioned on and off all the different history podcasts and things that we're listening to. So check those out. We've talked about them over the last couple of weeks. I won't bore you with all that, but there are just some great history podcasts out there that are worth listening to from the perspectives of the soldiers who've been there. Also, if there are any podcasts that we don't mention that y'all are enjoying, please feel free to mention those in the listeners group this week.
All right. Chris, what about you? What are you listening to?
I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. One of them in particular is Green Shirt Reviews. It's Cameron and a bunch of his friends are over there. He has never watched Star Trek The Next Generation, so now he's going through episode by episode and detailing every episode on the podcast. I have never laughed so hard at a podcast in my entire life.
Really?
I am serious. It was to the point I was in tears laughing at all of them, especially Marcy, one of the co-hosts on there. She is a riot. And she's got this infectious laugh that when she starts laughing, you're definitely going to laugh. And also Sean at Cheap Seat Reviews. Those guys are great too. They're hilarious. Every time they start coming, it's three of them just sitting around in South Carolina, sitting there going through a film. And one of them that really made me start laughing was the Godzilla versus Kong review, because they were all talking bad about the ship when it was going through Hollow Earth, and it was like, yeah, I don't know.
It was so bad. I have yet to be able to finish that movie. I've talked about it on the air. I watched about 20 minutes. I was like, I got to stop. And I went back, watched 20 more, maybe 30 more. And I said, I can't do this. There's so many other things that are worth my time. I can't just waste my life on this.
Power through, Alan.
You keep saying that.
Just power through it.
That's what I did. I just powered through it, man.
I'd actually paid money to see it, so I wasn't leaving.
Yeah, go watch the Nevers. You're gonna get your money's worth.
Oh man!
All right, Chris. What other podcasts could you throw out there as recommendations for folks to try out?
Definitely the Digital Dissection. We just recently wrapped up an interview with those guys, and I've been listening to them way before the interview. And those guys are hilarious. They're very cool, very easy to talk to, and just great hosts. That's it as far as podcasts, but I've also been listening to a score today, and I was very kind of surprised by it. It's called Oxygen. From the composer's name is Rob, and that's it, just nothing else. And apparently it's got a Netflix symbol to it, so I'm like, oh, okay. Score is very different, very drone atmosphere based, but it's got a synth element to it, and I was it was one of those, it's like, okay, I'm not turning it off. I like it so far. It's very different, so I'm like, I might check out the movie.
Let me put my mic back on. All right, actually, I was yelling at one of my dogs while you guys were talking. So
I seen him moving. What's going on
I
here?
can tell I'm getting to the point where they're like, it's late, we're supposed to go out. I'm like, I know, Daddy's not normally supposed to be recording this late. For what I'm listening to, I'll throw a shout out to the 60MW podcast. My buds over in the UK. Chris and Adam just put out another Spotlight Reflection show. They went and reviewed. This is a show where the 60MW is the name of the podcast, but they do basically like 12 different shows under that label. So you just have to look at what that episode's called. This one was a Spotlight Reflection. And what they're doing is they're going back and looking at the films that they remember from their childhood, but may not have seen in 20 or 30 years, and going back and rewatching and saying, do they hold up? if we
Oh.
watch them now. And they just got done doing No Retreat, No Surrender 2, to which my feedback was they made a sequel. So these guys spent 2.5 hours talking about a 90-minute movie. It was so funny hearing them talk about plot holes and trying to figure out what was happening in one stupid 80s martial arts scene after the next. So the Spotlight Reflection that just dropped is really, really good. But 60MW Podcast has a lot of entertainment and music-driven shows. My rant show just dropped a couple of weeks ago where me, Chris, and Adam just we just picked 2 or 3 topics that just really seem stupid, and we rant on them for a little bit. So that was a lot of fun. So check out 60MW. One of those history podcasts you mentioned, Walt, that I still am enjoying going through because it's from the perspective of where did the Marine Corps fit in U.S. history, but the history of the Marine Corps. And it really does start with pre-revolution all the way through to current warfare. And I'm still making my way through the early episodes. They're digestible. They're not too heavy on the history and done in a way that's just very engaging and easy to listen to. So those are 2 right now that I've been listening to pretty regularly besides Radio Labyrinth, which you already mentioned. And I got to do a shout out for my wife and I. We've got our marriage podcast, the Marriage Fit Podcast. We just had an episode drop a week or so back where we had a chance to sit down with an actual licensed marriage therapist, someone who, this is what he does for a living, tries to help people not get to the point where there's nothing left to save. He wants to help people in their relationships. And so one of the things Susan and I did when we started it was, hey, we've got a lot of stories to tell. We got a lot of battle wounds and scars, and we've got the 4 kids to prove it. So we decided to create a show called The Marriage Fit. The tagline is, we're trying to figure out how to make things fit, how to stay fit, and not throw a fit. The Marriage Fit Podcast. So check those out.
Nice.
All right. Anybody have anything else they want to add before we start to wrap up?
I think we about covered it.
Yep.
All right. Well, we will once again say to our guest, Chris, thank you so much for taking time with us here on The Wilder Ride. It has been fantastic having you within our listeners' lounge.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me, man. Guys, this was a blast.
Yeah, and we'll have to have you back next season when you've worked on some other stuff that you can share with us. We've really enjoyed having you tonight.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let me get a few more scores and I'll come back.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very quickly, I know we did it at the end of the interview, but for folks who powered through to the end and you stuck around with us, one more time, how do people learn a little bit more about you?
You can find a lot of my music on SoundCloud. Just search Chris Lott. And like I said before, just look for Alabama. You know it's me. Same with Bandcamp. Type in Chris Lott. You'll see Wilmer, Alabama. Again, that's me. You can also listen to our podcast. It's available everywhere that any podcast is. Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio. I think we're on Stitcher as well. We're on social media, Measuring the Score. You can find us on Twitter at Measure the Score. Thanks, Twitter, for not giving the ing in there, but it's at Measure the Score. You can send us an email, measuringthescore@gmail.com. Twitter is probably going to be the one place you can definitely get a hold of me a little bit better than most places. Give us a shout on there.
Excellent. Walt, I always give you the duty of giving everybody the detail. They knew Chris. Everybody, all of Chris's friends all powered through and listened to this episode. They've not listened to a single one of our episodes before, so now's our chance to hook up and tell them where they can learn more about us.
Yeah, the 2 places that you want to go to learn more about us. If you go to our website, which is thewilderride.com, you can find out everything you need to know about us. So all of our past episodes, all of our past guests. We started season 1 and 2 breaking down movies 1 minute at a time, the great movies of Gene Wilder. We covered in season 1, my favorite, Young Frankenstein. In season 2, the classic challenging for our era, Blazing Saddles. Uh-oh. And then last season, thanks to COVID and some other things going on, we started being more guest driven. And so we've had a bunch of guests, one of whom is right now circling the Earth as the commander of the International Space Station. That is Shane Kimbrough. We've had a guy who's climbed Mount Everest 5 times. We've had a whole host of other awesome people who've come on and shared their stories with us. So go back and look at that list and check out some favorites there. Also, you can go to facebook.com/The Wilder Ride, follow us there, and then a button will pop up so you can join our listeners group. And in there, we talk about what's going on with some of our past guests. We talk about what's going on our show, where you can buy albums from some of our past guests Old Sea Brigade came out with their album this week. You definitely want to check that out. And just a variety of other things related to entertainment and nothing related to politics or any of that crazy stuff. So just a fun place to hang out. So again, that's facebook.com/The Wilder Ride, and then join our listeners group.
And just like with Chris's podcast, any of the podcasts you listen to or ours, take a second to rate and review. And you know what? All these podcatchers have a share button. Take a second and share the episode. If you've enjoyed it, just put a quick note out there. Let your friends know what you're listening to. Help us all grow our audiences. We would really, really appreciate it. And come on back next week. We've got another great guest lined up for you here on The Wilder Ride. We're going to have actually a writer and a producer of television shows. We've got Amanda Raymond, who's going to be checking in with us. So you're going to want to stick around, but the only way we're going to learn more about her is to come on back next week for another brand new edition of The Wilder Ride Listener's Lounge. Man, how about that to kill 2 hours for an evening, Chris?
Crazy.
That was great.
You could have been watching a movie. You could have been watching Lamageddon or something.
Yes, you could have been watching Lamageddon, Chris.
But instead, you wasted it with us.
That was your other option.
That was actually on my list. I had Wilder Ride podcast or Lamageddon.
That was on your list of things I will never, ever do.
To quote the Grail Knight, you chose poorly.
Exactly. That diff a lot.
Hit the dance floor, you gotta be jumping, jump on in, jump, jump.